It was her 22nd birthday, a day meant for celebration. But the gentle afternoon walk quickly turned into a freezing nightmare. She had only planned to wander for a single, quiet hour. By dusk, the wind howled, driving the snow sideways through the spruce trees. The painted trail blazes vanished, swallowed by the creeping white darkness. In the freezing cold, she stopped believing she would ever see home again. Then, through the blinding veil of white, she stumbled upon something unexpected, a discovery hidden in the storm that would change her life forever. Deep in the ancient forest, at the foot of the silent mountain, a secret lay hidden. Far from any path, buried beneath a century and a half of heavy snow, stood a strange, weathered wagon cabin that defied all reason. A lonely structure, completely forgotten by the passage of time. For 3 long generations, no living soul had ever stepped inside. Inside, she uncovered a mystery waiting 152 years for her. Something so utterly unexpected, it defied the very laws of possibility. The secret meant only for her, answering the question she carried for so long, since she was just 4 years old. Left alone in a quiet station, carrying only a folded note pleading to find her a good home. All that would teach her, before the first winter snow began to fall, what it truly means to belong, and to finally find a family. 14th of December. Margo Pelletier turned 22, entirely alone. Our home was a small rented room above a hardware store on Main Street. She woke to the sound of freezing wind whistling through the window gap. Inside, the air was bitter cold, hovering at 38 degrees. The kerosene heater that kept the long winter at bay had run dry. The small electric heater beside her desk had gone cold overnight. She lay beneath the heavy quilt, watching her breath mist in the gray dawn. Staring at the ceiling, she counted those who remembered it was her birthday. The final count was 0. Every December 14 since childhood, she had kept this silent tally. And the number had only ever been 1. For the first 18 years, there was only one who truly saw her. Mrs. Beaulieu, a gentle widow living in a small house above the river. Margo had arrived there, lost and aged out of the foster system. Just 2 months before her 17th birthday, she finally found a home. Every December 14th, a sweet aroma would fill the quiet kitchen. For 5 beautiful years, the small almond cake was a promise kept. But on the 6th year, when the October leaves began to fall, in the quiet of her own bed, Mrs. Beaulieu's heart finally found its rest. On a crisp October morning, Margo walked down the creaking wooden stairs. She found her peaceful, an open book of poetry resting on her chest. By November, the small white and blue house by the river belonged to strangers. Margo carried the last of her life into small cardboard boxes. She packed her life into the back of the old Subaru. 6-month lease on a tiny studio above the hardware store. Margo had been a foster child since she was 4. Margo had been a foster child since she was 4 years old. Her mother, Cecile, came from the Quebec side of the border. Spring of 2006, they crossed the bridge at Derby Line. She was left at the front desk, abandoned to the quiet night. A simple folded note begged for a home she could not provide. Signed only with a single letter, a final silent goodbye. Cecile Pelletier vanished into the shadows, leaving no trace behind. She was never found, her voice lost to the passing years. And so began Margo's long, drifting journey through endless homes. She moved through Vermont foster homes. From age 4 to 16, none of the houses were cruel, yet none of them felt like home. Her last placement ended in March, wrapped in polite, cold paperwork. The documents never quite admitted she was simply too quiet. Through it all, the only constant was her own family name, Pelletier, an old French name meaning fur trapper, carried by thousands across New England and Quebec for 300 years, a name that told her nothing of who she once was. Before the day, she crossed the bridge at Derby Line. For as long as she could remember, she wanted only one thing. Not wealth, nor a grand house, nor even a mother's embrace. She wanted only to know that somewhere, in the long history of time, someone, somewhere, had once thought of her, and remembered the family she had lost to the shadows. He carried the memory of her name, holding it close through the years, like carrying water in cupped hands, careful not to spill a single drop. In the quiet morning, she brewed a simple cup of coffee. She ate a slice of warm toast, sweet with dark apple butter. Through the studio window, she watched the first snow fall on Main Street. Looking through the single window, her mind was finally made up. 8 hours of precious winter daylight stretched out before her. The Subaru was fueled, ready to carry her away from it all. She packed her thermos backpack and the green parka from a lost friend, heading 40 miles north, leaving the quiet town far behind. To walk alone among the snow-laden reeds of the wilderness, searching for just 1 hour of pure, undisturbed silence. She spent her birthday where her grandmother said the world was most beautiful. An hour and 20 minutes over the slow, snow-packed roads of the north. Turning off the highway, she reached the frozen shores of the quiet lake. She eased the car down an unplowed forest path toward the wooden sign. She parked at the empty turnout, surrounded only by the silent woods. In the quiet wilderness, hers was the only vehicle for miles around. A sharp click echoed, sealing her past inside the cold metal frame. She pulled the heavy green canvas tight, shielding herself from the rising wind. Thaw knotted at her throat, keeping the biting chill at bay. She hoisted the worn canvas pack, ready to face the lonely trail ahead. 5 winters of quiet love, stitched together from thrift store shelves. The winter snow lay thick and heavy at the start of the trail. For the first hour, she followed the familiar markers of Mount Hor. Every twist of the path brought back memories of the warm summer before. She remembered walking here with Mrs. Beaulieu, sharing quiet stories in the sun. They had rested on a high granite ledge, looking down at the lake. She spoke of their ancestors, of a man named Milo who started it all, a brave soul, who crossed the vast, stormy Atlantic from the Norman coast. It began on the rugged coast of France, in the year 1654. From one man, a vast family tree spread across a new continent, a legacy that held meaning, even when the rest of the world faded. High upon the cold granite ledge, Margo remembered his name. She walked the winding trail, guided by her foster grandmother's fading memory. Gentle snow began to fall, dusting the heavy green spruce branches. The world grew quiet, wrapped in the deep silence of a winter forest. Silence settled over the woods, the quietest thing on earth. As the hours passed, the sky bruised from pale gray to deep charcoal. A sudden, biting chill settled deep into the frozen air. The gentle flakes transformed, thickening into a heavy, relentless blanket. The northwest wind arose, whipping the snow sideways through the creaking trees. Margo pulled her hood tight, burying her face against the freezing wind. With trembling fingers, she reached into her pack, searching for warmth. A laminated map, a gift from Mrs. Beaulieu for her 18th birthday. The lines of the Mount Hor loop traced clearly in faded ink. The safety of the loop lay 40 minutes behind her. Turning back, she retraced her steps into the quiet, falling snow. 3 hours passed, and the cold truth settled in her heart. Somewhere in the white silence, She had taken a wrong turn. The blue paint marks on the spruce trunks had vanished. The familiar paths were gone, and the forest grew strange. Beneath her feet, the very earth seemed to tilt and shift. She stopped among the towering, white pines, turning slowly in the cold. She held the paper map, but the landscape refused to match. The world shrank as a thick, white fog closed in around her. Deepening snow swallowed her boots, dragging her down with every step. And then the wind began to howl its high, mournful song. The gentle snowfall turned, hardening into a fierce, blinding winter squall. On her pack, the small thermometer read 18 degrees, and it was dropping. Only 3 hours of pale winter daylight remained before the absolute darkness took over. In every direction, the white landscape looked identical. The trail was completely gone. The biting wind found the bare skin between her glove and her sleeve. The damp warmth of her climb turned to a sudden, biting shiver. A quiet clarity settled over her, sharp as the winter air. She had less than an hour before the cold would claim her. She recalled the pages of a borrowed book, read under summer skies. With steady hands, she chose the path of survival. She gently lowered her heavy backpack onto the cold, white ground. With freezing hands, she snapped a long, green pine branch. She drove the branch deep into the snow, marking her spot. From her inner pocket, she retrieved the small silver whistle. 3 slow, steady blasts echoed out the cry of the lost. She waited, straining to hear any sign of life. But the howling wind swallowed the sound before it could travel. Desperate, she blew the whistle 3 more times. Only the cold silence of the woods answered her plea. Only silence remained. She lifted her heavy pack. As she turned toward the path she hoped would lead her home. With every step she counted, anchoring herself to the frozen earth. 412. Then a shadow broke the white void. A long, low silhouette loomed in the distance through the storm. It rested silently against a dark wall of ancient spruce trees. In the dim light, it looked like a fallen giant. A long fallen tree lay half buried in the deep forest floor, resting there for 50 years, slowly sinking back into the moss. Yet, the color of this shape was wrong for weathered wood. It was not gray, but warm brown and pale cream under the snow. The shape had sharp and natural angles, defying the wild forest. She stepped closer, drawn toward the strange shape on the horizon. At 100 feet, her boots sank into the earth and she stopped. Through the howling wind, the shape began to reveal its true form. It was a pioneer wagon, just like the old photographs in her schoolbooks. It rested on heavy oak wheels, anchored deep in the Tennessee soil. A foundation of stone and cedar lifted the old wagon from the damp earth. A clapboard skir trapped around the frame, transforming the carriage into a home. Walls of hemlock and pine fit together, joined by patient, handmade cuts. A dark iron stovepipe pierced the canvas roof, capped against the autumn rain. A tiny metal bonnet crowned the chimney, whispering of warmth inside. A single frosted window looked out from the new clapboard wall. It fit so perfectly, as if it had always belonged right there. 3 simple wooden steps leaned gently against the wagon door. Beneath the wheels, dry corewood laced act in neat, quiet rows. The entire home was wrapped in a soft, protective embrace. Moss clung to the weathered wood, capped by a fresh dusting of winter snow. A strange structure stood before her, part cabin, part weathered wagon. Margo pressed forward, through the biting wind, her boots sinking in the drift. She stopped at the foot of a rough-hewn wooden ladder. Above her, a simple plank door hung on heavy iron hinges. No lock barred her way, Only the cold iron latch, no heavy chains, barred her way. Only a simple iron latch held the door shut. She climbed the wooden rungs, her gloved hands gripping the cold wood. With a quiet breath, she turned the cold iron handle. The heavy door creaked open, and she stepped into the dark. Instantly, a gentle, unexpected warmth wrapped around her. It was the deep, ancient warmth of wood that had long held the fire. The cabin held its breath, a memory waiting to be found. Inside, the air tasted of ancient hemlock and sticky pine pitch. Soaked deep into the canvas and cedar, sealing through countless winters. Dim blue light filtered softly through a single, frosted window pane. Margo paused at the threshold, waiting for her eyes to adjust. A tiny sanctuary, barely 12 feet long and 7 feet wide. Overhead, the old wagon's curved, canvas ceiling sheltered them from the world. Cedar shingles patched the worn fabric, holding back the passing years. The original cloth of 1872 remained oiled to a deep, leathery brown. Hemlock clapboards formed the sturdy walls, stacked tight against the mountain wind. Horsehair and old newsprint sealed the cracks to keep out the winter chill. In the quiet corner stood a small, four-legged stove of cast iron. A cast iron stove stood proud, its brass scrawlwork catching the dim cabin light. Beside it, a wooden box held dry kindling and neatly split hemlock. A long wooden bench lined the wall topped with a neatly folded cover. Across the room, simple cedar shelves held the few treasures of a quiet life. A heavy cast iron skillet rested near a brass kerosene lantern, its original wick untouched. Beneath the dusty front window, a small wooden folding table stood with 2 cane chairs. Above the door, a wool blanket hung, its color mimicking dried autumn oak leaves. Margo stepped inside, shutting the heavy wood and oar against the howling mountain wind. She gently set her worn canvas backpack down onto the smooth cedar floorboards. Walking to the cold cast iron stove, she placed her bare palm against its side. The heavy iron of the stove was cold to her touch. She knelt down, opening the door to the quiet hearth. Inside, the empty chamber held only the memory of fire. Dry kindling and split hardwood waited patiently in the box, laid out for a morning that would never arrive. She struck a match, bringing light to the gathering shadows. She reached into her pocket, finding the paper matchbook she always carried. It was a habit learned from Mrs. Pelletier, who understood the cold. To leave home without matches was too misunderstood, and the winter's danger. The match flared, and the lantern's wick caught the eager flame. A warm, amber glow filled the cabin, pushing back the dark. With the lantern lit, her eyes slowly adjusted to the new light. Above her, strange carvings emerged on the rough cedar wall. Carved letters emerged from the smooth, dark iron of the stove's back wall, carved with a small patient chisel, guided by a steady and careful hand. 2 columns of even text stood side by side in French and English. They were quiet instructions, teaching a stranger how to coax the stove to life, how to set the damper, drawing the smoke safely up into the cold night, and how to bank the embers, keeping the cabin warm until the morning light. Dawn arrived and the hearth still held the faint glow of dying coals. Above the columns, elegant French words were etched deep into the ancient cedar. "The cabin has done what we built it to do." The carving read, "A shelter is built for the traveler who has lost their way. Rest here and stay for as long as you have need." Signed by a hand from the past, Olivier Pelletier, 1872. And just below, the very same words were repeated in English. If you read this, the cabin has done what it was built to do. This sanctuary belongs to the lost traveler, seeking refuge from the cold. Stay as long as you need. Signed, Margo Pelletier, 1872. She read the words again, letting the truth settle into her heart. She gently placed the lantern down, its amber glow filling the quiet room. Standing beside the cold iron stove, she pressed her hands together in silent gratitude. She pressed her flat palm against the weathered cedar wall. The name Pelletier was carved there, written in a careful historic hand. In the stillness of the kitchen, she closed her eyes and breathed. She began to build the fire, guided by the old carvings. She laid the dry hemlock, kindling in a careful crosshatch pattern. A single match struck, bringing a sudden spark to the darkness. The flame caught, and she set the iron amber halfway open. Within minutes, the seasoned hardwood caught the flame. The old cast iron stove began to breathe its slow, steady warmth. The gentle heat rose slowly, kissing her ankles and warming her knees. It climbed higher, wrapping the quiet cabin in a comforting embrace. Margo unzipped her heavy green parka, feeling the chill finally fade. But she draped the worn canvas over a simple cane chair. Gently, she unwound the soft, mauve scarf from her neck. Finally, she pulled off her gray wool gloves, exposing her cold hands. She pressed her bare hands against the warm, dark iron. The heat pulsed through her, whispering that the cabin was alive. She sank onto the long wooden bench resting against the wall. Under the cedar cover, the wood shifted slightly beneath her weight. A hidden space lay below, waiting to be revealed. Her fingers found the small iron ring, lifting the heavy lid. The heavy wooden lid lifted, whispering secrets of the past. Hidden in the shadows lay a single, forgotten treasure. It was wrapped in yellowed canvas, bound tight by stiff twine. With trembling hands, she lifted the heavy bundle to her lap. Her fingers worked the knot, letting the old fabric fall open. Inside, a stack of 41 letters waited in the quiet light. A stack of handmade drag paper, each folded carefully into thirds. Every envelope bore the same elegant, slanted 19th century handwriting. The top letter was dated September 14th, 1872, from Vermont. It was Margo's own birthday, exactly 152 years ago. With trembling hands, she slowly began to unfold the first letter. The letter was written in French, its elegant script foreign yet familiar. Margo remembered her school days in Newport, learning the language of romance, and the long afternoons spent with Mrs. Beaulieu by the quiet river. Now, the foreign words flowed easily, revealing their hidden secrets. It was a father's message, sent from the cold shores of Quebec, written for his oldest daughter, Lucette, on the day she turned 22. My dear Lucette, it began. You are now 22 years old. Margo's eyes traced the faded ink of a long-forgotten letter. My dear Lucette, the cabin is finished. We are home. In the autumn of 1871, they left everything behind. Olivier and his wife, Adela, steered their family toward a new life. Beside them was young Lucette, embarking on a journey of survival. Two brothers, Henry and young Jules, stood alone against the vast world. In the chill of November, they crossed the border at Derby Line. They followed the winding river valley south, searching for a place to rest. Turning west, they trod the ancient stones of the old military road. Through the bitter, howling winter, a canvas tent was their only sanctuary. When spring arrived, they found their home in a quiet mountain clearing. The deep silence of Willoughby Forest welcomed their weary souls. They unhitched the tired horses, marking the end of their long journey. around the wooden wagon. They began to raise their new home. Olivier and Henry swung their axes, felling hemlock under the autumn sun. With steady hands, they squared the heavy timber, piece by painful piece. Adela and Lucette stripped the rough bark, preparing the wood for strength. Young Jules helped peg the joints, binding their dreams together. Together they laid horse-hire mortar, sealing out the biting winter wind. By mid-December, as the first snows fell, the cabin stood complete. On Lucette's 22nd birthday, they gathered inside to celebrate. They shared a small almond cake, tasting the sweet promise of tomorrow. Fresh bread, cooled on the new cast iron stove, filling the cabin with warmth. That evening, Olivia carved a message of welcome deep into the wooden wall. Written in French and English, it stood as a promise to any traveler, or the Canadian settler, or the Vermont logger. The cabin offered shelter. Margo read the letter twice, her eyes tracing every handwritten word. She laid the paper gently onto the worn cedar table. With trembling fingers, she reached for the second letter. A letter penned in the winter of 1872, sent to a sister far away. She described their lonely cabin, buried under Vermont's first heavy snowfall. The roof held, she wrote, though the howling wind kept them awake. Margo paused on the line, a faint smile touching her lips. The stranger, who wrote these letters, was slowly becoming real. A living, breathing person emerged from the ink. Someone who had once feared the coming storms, someone who had stood in the very spot Margo sat now. The third letter belonged to Lucette, written on her 22nd birthday. It was a simple journal entry, addressed to no one. I drew the cabin today by the light of the stove. As I drew the cabin today, warmed by the glow of the stove. When winter finally ends, I want to see the ocean. Just once. Margo paused, her hand hovering over the old diary page. A soft, gentle smile touched her lips in the quiet room. She could almost see her, the young girl now grown, sitting there. Hand sketches, the wooden ceiling in soft pencil. She had once dreamed of becoming a school teacher. She taught the young boys their letters into languages. They gathered at the small table beneath the cabin window. Outside, the bitter Vermont winters of the past raged on. The next letter held only a quiet, careful list. Olivier had written down every small possession they owned. He recorded the first winter stores with a careful, steady hand. 12 pounds of flour, 6 pounds of sugar, written in faded ink, 2 smoked hams and a heavy bucket of potatoes from the earth, 3 jars of Addie's pickles, and a single sack of salt. There was no grand adventure here, only the quiet poetry of survival. Instead of grand gestures, there were only the quiet, daily details. The carefully rationed food supply and the stacked firewood by the hearth. The patched shingles of the roof, holding back the heavy winter snow. Small victories of a family, fighting quietly to survive the cold. These simple things touched Margo deeper than any grand adventure ever could. For real life is never truly made of grand, sweeping moments. It is woven from the thread of ordinary, quiet days. The precious days that people fight so quietly to protect. Days passed gently, filled with quiet devotion for the ones they loved. In the golden autumn of 1874, a promise of love was made. Spring brought their wedding day, blooming with hope and new beginnings. They spoke their sacred vows inside a quiet, sunlit country church. Together, They raised a wooden home amidst the whispering pines. Soon, the quiet halls filled with the laughter of their children. 6 precious souls: Sophie, Marie Claire, Olivier, Henry Adele, and little Lucette. For 41 years, Lucette taught in the quiet one-room schoolhouse. In the winter of 1937 at 87, her long journey finally ended. Margo arranged the old letters, reading them one by one in the quiet. She traced every faded word, reading each line twice to hold the memory. Outside, the winter storm raged on, burying the world in white silence. The cold wind howled, bending the heavy spruce branches in the dark. And there sat Margo, alone on the night of her 22nd year. On her birthday, she sat upon a worn, hinged cedar bench. Cabin was built by another Pelletier 152 years ago. She gently opened the old letters left behind for a lost traveler. In the 11th letter, dated April 1873, Olivia wrote to a friend. He wrote that he built this sanctuary, not only for his own family. He left these words behind, for whoever might follow in his footsteps. In the winter of 1849, a young man wandered lost through the frozen woods. At the very edge of death, an old Algonquin trapper found his fading body. The old man carried him gently into a small shelter made of bark. Beside a flickering fire, he shared his warmth and fed the dying stranger. He saved a life, asking for nothing in return, not even a name. Saved my life, without ever knowing my name. He asked for no money, no reward in return. He only asked that I pass this kindness along. 23 years passed, but the promise remained unbroken. At the foot of the mountain, he built a sanctuary. He left behind a stove, a warm blanket, and dry wood. Instructions, carved into languages for the next traveler. Margo gently placed the 11th letter onto the cedar table. At the bottom of the stack lay one last, separate letter. It was sealed with brown wax, bearing a small fleur-de-lis. The envelope was addressed in Olivia's familiar, elegant handwriting, a message addressed to the lost traveler. She held the paper, feeling the heavy weight of its silence, turning it over, searching for a name that wasn't there. With a quiet breath, she broke the red wax seal. To the lost traveler, the faded ink read, "If you read this, our cabin has done its duty. You are safe here. Stay for as long as you need. When you depart, leave nothing behind. Only save some dry wood for the next weary traveler. Kindness I show you today is not my own. It belongs to an old Algonquin named Miss Hikini, from the year 1849. I am merely the hand that carried this warmth forward. Now, it is your turn to pass the flame along." Signed with Hope Olivia Pelletier, December 14, 1872. To the weary traveler who has lost their way in the dark. If you read these words, this sanctuary has done its duty. You are safe now. Rest here for as long as you need. When you leave, only leave behind dry firewood for the next soul. This quiet kindness you feel does not originate from me. It belongs to Miss Hikini, an Algonquin man who saved me long ago. I am merely the hand that carries this warmth forward. Now, it is your turn to pass this light along. Signed in Hope Olivier Pelletier, the 14th of December, 1872. She gently placed the letter onto the worn cedar table, burying her face in her hands. The tears finally began to fall. She wept in the quiet room, letting the heavy silence wrap around her. No one had baked her an omelette and cake on this lonely morning. 14 long weeks had passed since Mrs. Bellevaux had gone. She wept for Miss Hikini, the young Algonquin trapper in the frozen wilderness. who saved Margo Pelletier from the icy grip of winter. Long ago, years later, that single act of kindness rippled forward, passed along from one caring hand to another, reaching down through 8 generations of human lives, surviving the bitter cold of 150 snowstorms. It pulled a freezing young woman in from the bitter cold, rescued on the very day of her birth, safe beside a warm stove in a cabin that shouldn't exist. She wept, knowing a miracle had traveled through time to save her. Out there in the wide world, someone had remembered her. They had spoken her name, keeping it alive, carrying her memory forward through the long passage of time, like water held carefully in cupped hands, not spilling a single drop. And now, at last, that quiet thought had reached her. She softly wiped the tears from her weathered face. She placed the split logs into the glowing iron stove. She paced the quiet cabin, bathed in the soft glow of the lantern. Near the heavy wooden door, the floorboards shifted slightly beneath her boot. Kneeling in the shadows, she reached for the secrets hidden below. She pulled back the faded rag rug, revealing the secrets of the cedar. A single wide plank lay hidden, marked by a small carved finger hole. With trembling fingers, she reached into the dark space beneath the floor. With a creak of old wood, the floorboard finally gave way. Hidden beneath the dust lay a secret stone-lined vault. Resting in the shadows was an ancient, forgotten leather satchel. She reached down, lifting the heavy burden of the past. Inside, wrapped in simple cloth, lay a fortune in gold. 63 gold coins, bearing faces of emperors and liberty. Gold coins glinted in the dim light, relics of a forgotten journey. A brass pocket watch, its ticking long silenced by the passage of time. Engraved with a name and a year, a quiet testament to a life. A faded photograph, holding the ghosts of a family long gone. They stood before their wagon, bathed in the golden glow of autumn. Olivier's gentle hand rested on his wife's shoulder, a silent promise. Lucette held a small almond cake, a sweet memory of home. Beside them stood young Adela and the children, looking toward the future. Beside the boys, the satchel spilled its long-hidden secrets. A folded document lay inside, its thick parchment yellowed by time. A heavy seal of red wax bound the ancient family deed. It was the original deed to the 12-acre Mount Hor parcel. At the very bottom rested a single, small bronze key. It hung from a leather lanyard bearing a handwritten French inscription, a promise left for the next hand destined to carry it. A quiet promise to carry their kindness forward. Her fingers closed around the heavy bronze key. Silent, mystery waiting for its lock. She lay down to rest on the old cedar bench, wrapped in a wool blanket left behind by ancient hands. The fire burned low as the lantern flame flickered. Outside, the falling snow began to quiet down, and in the quiet dark, she began to dream. A face she had never seen, yet known in the quiet of her blood. Sitting at a kitchen table, gently folding rag paper into thirds. Then the dream dissolved, as she woke to the cold dawn. There was no dramatic sunrise, no golden light to warm the room. Only a pale gray glow filtered slowly through the eastern sky. For a fleeting moment, Margo did not remember where she was. She opened her eyes to the curved cedar ceiling above. Hand-cut hemlock beams stood silent, holding the scent of fading wood smoke. And the memories returned: the howling storm, the cabin, and the letters. Lucette sat up slowly, pulling the heavy wool blanket to her chest. Nearby, the hearth fire had quieted to a soft, glowing ember. The embers faded, yet a gentle warmth lingered inside the cabin. Outside, The howling wind had died, replaced by a soft, protective silence. Margo quietly pulled on her leather boots, ready to face the morning. She stepped closer to the small, frosted windowpane to look outside. The storm had vanished, leaving a pristine blanket of white across the earth. Heavy spruce branches bowed low, cradling the fresh, heavy snow. The distant ridge of Mount Achor stood silent, and touched by the passage of time. Yet, within these walls, her entire world had quietly shifted forever. She turned slowly toward the old cedar table, where the bundle lay waiting. Once a haunting mystery, the letters now felt like old, familiar companions. She stirred the dying embers, seeking warmth as she sat beside the hearth. She sat on the wooden bench, reading the remaining letters as dawn approached. She held each page gently, the rush of urgency replaced by a quiet peace. It felt like meeting her ancestors, learning the names of her own people. She gathered the worn papers, binding them safely once more with rough twine. Placing the bundle back inside the bench, she lowered the heavy satchel. She closed the secret compartment beneath the worn cedar plank. Only the bronze key remained, slipped safely into her heavy canvas pocket. She banked the stove, leaving embers to guard the fading warmth. For fresh logs were laid ready, a silent gift for the next traveler. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, sealing the warmth inside. She stepped down the ladder, pausing on the very last rung. Across the pristine white clearing, a line of tiny fox tracks caught her eye. But further still, leading into the dark spruce, lay a different path. Heavy boot prints, half buried by the wind, left by a stranger yesterday. She stepped out of the clearing, heading toward the quiet lake. A quiet realization settled in. She was not the first to arrive. Fresh footprints pressed into the damp earth, marking an unknown path. A mysterious stranger had walked these woods just hours before. She stepped forward, into the brilliant glow of the morning sun. On her return, the hidden path finally revealed itself through the brush. The morning sun broke, washing away the remnants of the storm. A faint trail wound south, disappearing into the quiet spruce. Faded red paint blazes marked the path of long ago. At the granite ledge, summer memories lingered in the cold air. She walked alone, returning to the empty Forest Service road. With a quiet click, she unlocked the waiting car. 84 miles of highway stretched ahead, back to Newport. Some secrets, she decided, were meant to remain untold. The next day, she stepped into the quiet sanctuary of the library. Her fingers traced the worn spines, searching for the lost records. For 2 long afternoons, she lost herself in the ink of old names. She followed the faded lines of history, finding the end of Lucette, a thread of blood and memory, stretching all the way to the present. In the quiet pages, his name appeared, Yancey Goodwin, age 74. Beside him, his wife Adeline, 71, shared the weight of the years. The old directory marked them simply as retired dairy farmers. Their home stood quiet and still, far out on West Hill Road. On the 3rd afternoon, she finally closed the heavy genealogy register. She drove back to her quiet studio above the old hardware store. The next morning, she reached out to the Historical Society. On the other end, a French-Canadian director answered her call. She reached out to Drive Marshall, a historian of the old ways. In careful, borrowed French, Margo spoke of the secrets she uncovered. On the other end, the historian listened in heavy, thoughtful silence. He asked but a single question, his voice laced with sudden gravity. "Do not touch a thing," he warned. "We arrive at dawn." 3 mornings after her birthday, they returned to the mountain cabin. The old wagon cabin stood quiet, waiting to reveal its secrets. Every corner and weathered beam was captured, preserved in time. Handwritten letters, once forgotten, were carefully placed into the archive. The worn leather satchel and pouch were sealed away for safekeeping. The faded dagger yachu and the historic land deed found their final resting place. Dr. Marshall lingered in the doorway, bathed in the slanting morning light. The pale light of December filtered softly through the cabin window. He pressed his bare hand against the carved name on the cedar wall. In a quiet whisper, he spoke the words in French. For 152 years, this cabin stood strong. Then, they began to take it apart, board by board. Every single timber was carefully numbered and recorded. Slowly, the trucks carried the pieces down the steep mountain. Piece by piece, the old cabin rose again, safe from the passing of time. Within the quiet stone walls of a historic Vermont museum, a sanctuary holding the largest collection of French-Canadian settler relics. On a crisp October day, the doors finally opened to the public. Margo Pelletier stood ready, a guardian of the cabin's long-forgotten secrets. She stood at the threshold welcoming every traveler who crossed the cabin's wooden door. Her voice carried greetings into tongues, bridging the past and the present. Just as Olivier had carved his welcome into the cedar wall, lifetimes ago. Soon the local press arrived, eager to capture the spirit of the old cabin. Heavy cameras rolled, broadcasting the cabin's quiet rebirth to the wider world. By the third Sunday, the tale reached the grand pages of the Boston Globe. The modest museum began its new chapter, cradled in the warmth of history. The quiet halls filled with the footsteps of thousands of new seekers. New guides were called to share the weight of the growing history. On a cold December Sunday, two quiet souls arrived at the door. Yancey, a retired dairy farmer, walked softly beside his beloved Adeline. Together, they wandered through the cabin gallery lost in the fading light. They stopped at the glass case, staring at Lucettes' final, silent words. Adeline pressed her gloved hand against the cold glass, lost in silent memory. After a long silence, Yancey turned slowly toward the quiet dozen standing nearby. "My great-great-grandmother," he whispered, "was Lucette Pelletier Goodwin. For 60 long years, our family has searched for this very cabin." Margo gazed at Yancey, then turned her eyes to silent Adeline. A secret held close, she kept her own name hidden in the quiet. Yancey lowered his gaze, his eyes catching the glint of her metal badge. He read the engraved name once, then read it slowly a second time. Slowly he looked up, searching the features of her quiet face. For a long silent minute, the world outside seemed to fade away. Then the ancient words of his great-great-grandmother Lucette echoed in his mind. Words taught to him as a boy on the green hills of Craftsbury. The secret whispered every Christmas Eve around the crowded family table. She lived in the West Hill Road farmhouse until her final days. For sacred words were passed down, hand by hand, through 8 generations. From Missy Keeney to Olivier, then to Lucette and Henry Goodwin. Through Olivier, Yancey Sr. and Jr., spanning 175 years. "There you are," Yancey Goodwin whispered into the quiet room. Adeline Goodwin slowly turned away from the dusty window pane. She turned her eyes toward Margo, searching for a connection. With quiet steps, she walked slowly toward the boundary rope. Gently, she reached out and lifted Margo's hand. She pressed her gloved palm against the young woman's bare hand. A stranger she did not know, yet somehow recognized. "Will you come for Christmas Eve?" she whispered softly. Margo looked at her and softly whispered yes. On Christmas Eve. She sat at the long wooden dinner table. The table was built by Henry Goodwin in the autumn of 1876. That same year, he married Lucette at the Newport Catholic Church. Round this table, Lucette taught her 6 children to read. Through 41 winters, she shared the warmth of language and love. Hansi and Adeline set a place for Margo at the table's foot, right beneath the faded portrait of Olivier, Adele, and their children. In the winter of 1872, a feast of warmth awaited her. She tasted the sweetom and cake, baked from an old family recipe. Later, they gathered in the parlor warmed by the glowing wood stove. Hansi reached out, placing a small, weathered wooden box into her hands. Resting on faded red velvet was a single, ornate bronze keyhole. It was the perfect match for the key she wore from the future, a bridge across time, waiting to be unlocked. She reached beneath her collar, where she had carried it for over a year. The key fit perfectly into the ancient bronze keyhole of the cedar chest. Lucette had brought this chest south from her father's wagon cabin in 1875. For generations, the family kept it locked, waiting for the next daughter. On Christmas Eve, Margo finally turned the key and opened the heavy lid. She sat in the warmth of a house that had stood for generations. Round her stood family she had only just discovered. Inside the ancient chest, she uncovered a delicate, faded wedding veil. Beneath the lace lay a worn, leather prayer book, and then a small journal inscribed with a message in French. For my youngest cousin, who will come one day. At the very top lay a tiny, hand-stitched linen gown from 1860. 21 children had worn this sacred cloth at their christenings. Now, it waited quietly for the next child in the family line. On a cold December morning, Margo celebrated her 23rd birthday. At 10 o'clock, she stepped inside the historic stone museum. Yancy and Adeline stood waiting at the threshold of the wooden cabin gallery. In Adeline's hands, a small lamb and cake rested gently on a glass plate. It was baked with love, following her grandmother Lucette's cherished old recipe. Together, their 3 voices rose in harmony, singing a gentle birthday song. They gathered before the hand-carved cedar wall, just above the warm stove. For 18 long years, the count of their small family had remained at 1. After 14 weeks of silence, their quiet home suddenly multiplied to 8. That is the beautiful, quiet magic of simple human kindness. No one tells you what it feels like to be so small and lost. Handed across a border, clutching a folded note and a tiny suitcase. Kindness does not travel in straight lines. It moves in quiet spirals. It began with an old Algonquin trapper in the deep woods of 1849. He passed a silent grace to a young man named Olivier. Olivier carried that warmth for 23 years through the northern wilderness, until he carved those words onto the cedar wall of a wagon cabin. Lucette carried this quiet grace for 41 years, through the creaking floorboards of a one-room schoolhouse. Children passed it on, working the dairy farm on West Hill. Yancy and Adeline carried it through a 60-year search, seeking a hidden cabin that seemed lost to the world. Yet the cabin stood, guarding a kindness untouched by 100 winters, waiting patiently in the quiet woods for the next lost traveler. You do not have to be famous to truly matter. You do not need to be remembered by history to leave a mark. You only have to be a single hand offering one small kindness. A simple gift given to a stranger you may never see again. Trust that this quiet act of grace will be carried forward, passing through the long, cold winters, from one soul to another, until it reaches the warm hearth of someone you have never met. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs it. Tell us, Has a stranger's kindness ever found its way to you? Traveling across the long years just to reach you at last, arriving in a way you could have never predicted. We would love to read the stories you hold close. Until we meet again on the next quiet road.